The Blair Witch Project had its seed in the most simple of elements, the idea of a stick figure hanging from a tree. Daniel Myrick conceived that image and found it incredibly creepy to think about. The idea percolated for a long time, and eventually he shared it with his friend Eduardo Sanchez while they were film students at the University of Florida in 1991. They took that seed and reflected on the idea until the full film concept finally emerged. 3 students had gone out into the Maryland woods to make a documentary about a legend involving a witch and were never seen again. Because they were making a documentary, the footage that they shot would be used to compose the final film. Technology had reached a point where the students could be shooting a sort of video diary while making their project. They put together a 35-page treatment about this, but with a twist. The treatment only discussed what would happen. There was not any dialogue whatsoever. What they wanted to do was to hire actors to completely improvise the words, even if they were reacting to whatever plot the filmmakers were generating. It wasn't until 1996 that they were finally in a position to get started, and another year to actually move on to casting. Once we get past that opening message, there's very little explanation, only that Heather here is leaving for the weekend to explore the legendary Blair Witch and has brought some books along. She meets her camera operator, Josh, who had been her ex-boyfriend in a previous iteration of the treatment, but this was changed at the last minute. The third picked up is Mike, who will be handling sound. All of this quickly and efficiently establishes things for us. We're 2.5 minutes in, and that includes the Lionsgate logo. We know what happened, who, broadly speaking, these 3 are, and we know what their intentions are.
I don't want to go cheesy. I want to really avoid any cheese. I want to present this in as straightforward a way as possible, and I think the legend is unsettling enough.
When they put the ads out to bring in people for auditioning, they made it very clear that this was going to be hard, stating, quote, to be shot under very difficult conditions, and in all caps, extremely challenging roles. On arrival for the audition, signs were posted making clear that, while you will never be placed in harm's way, you will be outdoors most of the time and frequently uncomfortable. Don't bother auditioning if you can't handle that. But an open call for this age group who weren't yet in the union was enough of an opportunity to handle this discomfort.
This is Burkittsville, formerly Blair. It is a small, quiet Maryland town. Much like a small, quiet town anywhere. No more than 20 families laid their roots here over 200 years ago. Many of whom remain, either on this hill or in the town below.
The original intention was for there to be 3 male students, but as is quite common, casting will sometimes involve those who weren't necessarily what were envisioned for the part. For instance, several male actors were auditioned for the role of Captain Janeway on Star Trek Voyager. One of the women who auditioned for the piece was Heather Donahue. The roles, as stated, would demand an ability to improvise, and they were surprised when she responded to instructions that she was at a parole hearing that she immediately told the board, "I probably shouldn't be released." She looked Myrick straight in the eye while she said that, and he and Sanchez both admitted they found it a little terrifying. She was in. Of course, this was a shoestring budget film, and Heather's parents actually were worried that what was really going on here was a snuff film. Our trio of students have finished their establishing shot for the documentary and now head into town for some investigation and filming of interviews with any locals that might know anything about the Blair Witch. Naturally, these are all plants for the 3 actors to find. What they learn is that kids in the area, the ones noted as having died young in the cemetery establishing shot, began to disappear. 2 hunters were also reported to have disappeared in the area near where the haunting was supposed to have been happening. Apparently, old Mr. Parr came down from the mountain one day to declare he was finally finished. While the implication might normally be that it was with his recreation of Gettysburg using only taxidermied animals, they actually found that he had 7 dead children up there.
What he did is he took the kids down in the basement by 2s, and he made one face into the corner.
Really?
And then he would kill the other one.
The old man that is interviewed on film puts them on the trail of Mary Brown, who was interviewed as well, discussing her encounter with a woman with hair on her arm like a horse, and then revealing the rest of her body is that way as well. By now we're seeing signs that Heather, that is, the character, because the characters are named after the performers, let me just say now that if you're not sure who I'm referring to the character. I'll try to make it clear from context if I'm referring to the actors. Anyway, what we're seeing is the first sign that Heather is a control freak. She doesn't want the people to tell their stories, she wants to pull their story out of them. She frequently interrupts them with questions, instead of letting them speak and then following up with clarifying things afterwards. While it is understandable that this big film project is her baby, this approach to the filming helps us see where things will be going later on.
Checking my depth of field chart to see how bad.
So you measured for meters? What? We're not in Europe.
Well, the fucking lens has meters on it, okay?
It also has our system.
Michael Williams was attracted to the idea of a job that combined both acting and camping, and got the role of the sound man. He had to be taught how to do that, of course, as did Josh Leonard, who was the third member of the group and supposed to be their camera expert. That conversation there was real, actually. Josh, the actor, really did screw up the meters and feet on the camera. With the filming in town handled for the day, they crash at a motel for the night.
Do we have any weed?
Appropriately, given that, Heather Donahue has quit acting and currently grows medical marijuana out in California. She even wrote a book about it called Grow Girl. The next morning is when it's time to head into the woods, where they come across a pair of guys fishing, one poor schmuck trying to tell his story, and one Scooby-Doo character saying, "Damn fool, kids never learn," and keeps interrupting the guy. I get the sense the old coot isn't coming back from this fishing trip. With the fishermen left behind, we arrive at the point where the car must be left behind to proceed on foot, to reach Coffin Rock, where Heather reads from a book a description of what was found there, of 5 men, a search party that had gone out for a missing girl, who were bound in a circle and disemboweled alive. In preparation for the role, Heather was provided with a large backstory on the Blair Witch, that this was her character's obsession, and so this documentary was more than just a film project. The characters are on to their next spot, an old cemetery, and having camped for the night are now trying to get there.
I said I knew where we were going.
Wait. Would that be a full of shit statement?
No, I didn't.
Would that be a full of shit statement?
With the cast complete, they were given training to be able to handle being isolated in the woods for over a week. Areas had been pre-mapped, GPS and walkie-talkies were provided, and notes and supplies were frequently left for the performers. The food that they were given would vary, with the intention of leaving them hungry enough to be irritable, but not so hungry as to have difficulty hiking through the woods. Greg Hale, their producer, had been in the military and saw to a lot of the training the actors underwent, and he told them basically the filming theory in a nutshell. Your safety is our primary concern, but your comfort is not. But this is still early in their hike, so while there's a little friction that Heather might not know where they are, there's still an overall upbeat attitude among the three of them, still plenty of smiles. Yet the other two are quickly questioning if she knows where they're going, which she regards with open contempt, hearkening back to the control freak previously established.
Did you agree to do this project?
I did. I agreed to a scouted-out project. I didn't
It
agree
is
to just
scouted out, and I
traipse around
told
the
you that
woods.
getting...
Before being cast in this role, Michael moved furniture. After the film broke box office records for an independent film, he actually quit his job on Conan O'Brien's show. Unfortunately, he wound up having to go back to it again, as he found acting work was just too unreliable of income when he had a newborn daughter. Steven Spielberg spoke really highly of his performance in this film and asked what project he was getting up to. This was during the filming of Minority Report when he was talking with Myrick. Michael is said to have laughed at this and feared that Spielberg wouldn't be able to find him, and was told he didn't need to worry. The number is on the side of the truck after all. Stone cold. During their latest hike, they find piles of rocks, something that Mary Brown had mentioned to them, but wasn't important enough to film, so Heather can't recall what was significant about it. So they finally just set up camp, but do eventually come back to get some more footage of the rocks in case it proves to be important. Because of its nature, the Blair Witch Project doesn't have the natural breaks that other works do. Events flow and change gradually, rather than being able to see where changes in story structure are happening. An act structure is a purely arbitrary division between one scene and the next. This organic progression plays into the film's greatest strength, its efforts to convince you that this is reality. While filming in the dark, Josh accidentally disrupts one of the stone piles, and Heather puts it back to rights, just in case. But there might be a connection between that and the sound of activity in the woods in the middle of the night. While there has been some sniping, this is the first serious fracture in the group, as Heather lays into Mike for refusing to go out and record the sound of it with the sound equipment. Michael's point is that if it's people, then there's something wrong with them, and he doesn't want to get drawn into that. And if Heather's suggestion that it's not people was true, he doesn't want to get involved in that either. Heather says that her first thought is to film this. Whatever happens, film it, which ties back to her character's sense of control. I'm not bringing that up to attack the character. I'm trying to show her perspective on this. The filter through which she sees this is that this is her film. She's making a film, and thus she is in control of it. Every aspect of it. The thought that she could be in danger doesn't really register.
We just did a map check, and it seems like we're still pretty much on trail.
That's not what I said.
They're trying to get back to the car now with the map and the compass, and this is the point when the other two feel a line has been crossed. They don't want to spend another night in these woods. Mike is clearly on the cusp of being enraged at the very idea of it. But they have to set up camp. There's no way that they can find the car in the dark, and sure enough, there's more activity that night like the previous one. And the next day, 3 piles of rocks around their campsite. This further incentive to get to their car and leave is not needed, but it runs into the problem of the map. It's missing, adding to the tensions between Heather and Josh. Josh suspects that she wants to keep working on the documentary rather than getting them out of there. This is the point when Josh's own character is really emerging. He's kind of like a Starbuck, as in Moby Dick. He took Heather's lead up until now, but wanted her to remain on mission, as it were, not let her get drawn off by obsession. Before, he was taking action to help them get this done and get it done right. Now he's feeling more like he might need to steer this ship because he's not sure that he can trust his captain. As for Mike, he has been teetering on the mental brink and confesses amidst mad laughter at their situation that the map is gone because he kicked it into the creek. This, naturally, turns the other two immediately against him, with Josh getting physical and Heather screaming at him. But she's still demanding she's in control by not letting Josh use the compass, and Josh refusing to let her absolve herself of the situation that they're stuck in just because Mike screwed up royally. Her belief that she's still in control is to respond to the discovery that stick figures in trees ahead is to instead stop and film them with the 60mm camera, meaning for the documentary, instead of focusing on getting them out of there. The Blair Witch Project didn't invent the found footage format, but it is the one that brought it to everyone's attention. In fact, the previous year had seen a made-for-TV film, Alien Abduction, which was itself a remake of the 1989 McPherson tape about alien invaders during a birthday. The UPN remake is set during Thanksgiving. That movie led to much confusion by the audience of what they were seeing, and even led to confusion as to whether or not what they were seeing was real. This would be taken to an entirely new level with the Blair Witch Project. Thanks to its pioneering marketing, they used its website to imply that the events were indeed real, providing an even larger context for all this to happen in. People were questioning whether or not these students were actually dead. An artisan who purchased the rights to release the film were all too happy to make people believe that. As Josh commented a few years later, they would have preferred it if all 3 of them had actually died. This marketing success was a double-edged sword, as it certainly helped make it the most successful independent film up until that time, but that marketing was given an oversized credit in that regard.
I don't know why you can't admit that you've been screwed from the moment we got out here, man.
Because I haven't.
Because Josh and Heather are struggling for control, Mike seems to feel he can leave all the adult aspects to them, and he just does whatever. Other people are handling the serious job, so he's free to freak out. That night they try to hide by not lighting a fire and keeping their lights off, but instead they hear the sound of children outside, and then something's at their tent, driving them out screaming into the night, especially when Heather spots something and swears in terror at it. They huddle up until dawn, returning to find their camp trashed and Josh's stuff covered in slime. That pushes him across the line now.
Do I look like I'm laughing at all?
No, but you're going around doing your documentary thing, man.
What makes found footage work is realism, which brings up the Achilles heel, why characters keep filming. Heather's documentary thing helps explain that here. That controlling personality over this project means that by filming it, this is all still part of her video diary, all part of her movie, all part of her project that she controls. She even, without mentioning it, had taken one of the stick figures. We see the broken remains after the camp is trashed. She presumed that with all that was going on, she was somehow still divorced from it because it was her project.
No, but it's totally like a filtered reality, man. It's like you can pretend everything's not quite the way it is.
The activity directed at Josh the night before is the blow that destroys the group. With being singled out, Josh can no longer emotionally carry the load anymore, and so while Heather tries to endure by asserting dominance, he withdraws, and Mike is forced into a role that he's not equipped for, trying to be a balance for them to make it. That's why the discovery that, despite following the creek south all day, they have somehow still gone in a circle, well, overwhelms them. Their morale lost, Josh lets loose his frustration on Heather for taking the stick figure and mocks the idea that being the filmmaker means anything anymore.
I want to make movies, Heather. Okay, here's your motivation. You're lost. You're angry in the woods. And no one here is here to help you. There's a fucking witch and she keeps leaving shit outside your door. There's no one here to help you. She left little trinkets. You fucking took one of them. She ran after us. There's no one here to help you. We walked for 15 hours today. We ended up in the same place. There's no one here to help you. That's your motivation.
They make camp for the night, trying to find something to keep the spirits up, talking about foods that they miss. The actors had what they jokingly called a safe word while they were out there, so that they could stop and talk out of character. They regretted the choice of the word, though, because it was taco. It just reminded them of how hungry they were. The following morning, they awaken to discover Josh is gone. His equipment is all still here, but the man himself has vanished. Like Starbuck, he's been lost while the obsessed person he was following goes on. After giving up their search for him, they head east, only to be awakened that night by the sound of Josh screaming. Not for help, just screaming. He doesn't respond when they call out to him, and the following morning, after making sure Mike is still with her, Heather heads outside and finds a bundle of twigs tied up. At first she throws them away, but is unable to resist her obsession and goes back to open it, discovering blood, hair, and teeth inside what looks like Josh's shirt. This is the moment when all illusion is finally broken for Heather. She realizes that this is likely going to end in doom, and she must own it. Everyone did screw up. Josh knocked over the cairn, Mike kicked the map into the river, she took the stick figure. But she believed that she was in control, and she never was.
I'm going to put my gloves on. I'm going to put my gloves in my hands. Gloves in my hands.
You all right?
With Heather really grasping how bad things are, and with Josh gone now, Mike has to pivot yet again, becoming the emotional rock for Heather rather than letting them handle it. This completes his character arc. He went from essentially a lackey to what is effectively the leader in all of this, in that he's the one from which Heather must now take strength. Heather, on the other hand, instead of insisting that they do what she thinks they should, suggests something to Mike and sees if he thinks it's a good idea. What they have done is essentially reach the same point from opposing directions. Mike has to give up the immaturity that drove him to childishly kick the map into the river and instead rise up to be part of the solution. And Heather has to begin trusting more in Mike to help them get out of this. What they have both realized is that they're equal partners in their survival now. Mike has to be emotionally there, and she has to be willing to put her trust in him. Films are made at editing, but it was especially important in the Blair Witch Project. They had trimmed down 19 hours worth of footage into a 1 hour and 21-minute film. That was about more than just cutting out what wasn't necessary. It was rather using what was there to tell the story. For instance, in a lot of the early material shot, Heather was bickering with either Mike or Josh about something. By leaving that out, by only focusing in on the positive character moments, they're able to show the gradual decline in their relationship throughout the film. So it's important to note just how much of all of this is being done in the editing room, which the two directors did themselves. When an indie picture makes a lot of money, usually the genius of its creation is lauded. But the Blair Witch Project was operating so outside of the norms that Hollywood just didn't know what to make of it. Myrick and Sanchez didn't get the credit for it because, hey, it was all shot by the actors out in the woods. And, as if that wasn't crazy enough, the actors are not getting the credit. They're told, hey, you were just playing yourselves. While Myrick and Sanchez were given opportunities, they were unimpressive studio horror pictures to do, not the kind of projects that they would have preferred or have been allowed to pursue under other circumstances. I mean, consider, for instance, Kevin Smith's Clerks made $3.1 million. And on the basis of that, a major studio wanted to bankroll his next film. Same exact situation with Steven Soderbergh. Sex, Lies, and Videotape made $36.7 million. Same thing with him. And of course, there are other cases of, here's a huge budget studio picture that we want you to run based on the strength of your indie picture. Like what happened with Gareth Edwards after his $4.2 million film Monsters. I'm not arguing that Myrick and Sanchez would have gone on to produce the greatest film ever if they'd been given serious offers, but I'm just saying that in light of other indie filmmakers, a $250 million box office return should not prompt an offer to direct The Exorcist 4. That night is the film's most famous scene, Heather's confession, when she recognizes how her obsession brought them to this end. The fact that her face is cropped and you see a close-up of her nose has lent the scene to parody, but the framing actually works for this. You can hear her voice, but you can't see her lips moving. The camera is centered upon her right eye, well, almost, and by doing so, it draws the viewer to look her in the eye as you hear her. And because this is an unscripted and raw speech, it is as if we are reading her mind in this moment. We have rarely seen Heather because she had the camcorder, and yet we have heard her speaking the entire film. We have seen the events through her eyes. Turning it around and staring into her eye is now leaving her soul naked before the camera. That whole "you were just playing yourselves" dismissal of the actors is actually a compliment wrapped inside of an insult. Harrison Ford once told the story of how, after his first role as a bellboy, the guy at Columbia in charge of new talent called him into his office and said, I saw the rushes from yesterday. You're never going to make it in this business. Just forget about it. The first movie Tony Curtis was ever in, he delivered a bag of groceries. You took one look at that guy and you said, that's a movie star. Ford said he leaned across his desk and replied, I thought you were supposed to think that was a grocery delivery boy. A sense of realism is what allowed the Blair Witch Project to succeed, and that extended to the fact that the actors, although in one of the most extreme forms of method acting ever, made it look like you weren't looking at actors. It gave fuel to the widespread rumors that they were dead. It required the police to issue a statement that this was just a movie, and all the official statements made by law enforcement were part of the fiction. The line between the character and the actor so blurred that even knowing they are actors, made it hard to accept that what you're watching is actually acting. After her confession, they again hear Josh's voice and follow the sound of it into the woods, where they discover an abandoned house. Inside this unique fixer-upper, they still hear Josh's voice and eventually see children's handprints all over the walls, not to mention runes. After reaching the top of the house, Mike is convinced that Josh is in the basement and races down there, followed by Heather. When Mike reaches the basement, the camera is dropped. And when Heather arrives, she finds him standing in the corner facing the wall, in keeping with the comment one of the townspeople said about Parr, that he would put one kid in the corner looking away while he killed the other. We have no time to think, though, as Heather is struck, drops the camera, and is silent. This ending led to the love it or hate it response at the time, between those who felt cheated that they never saw the monster, and those saying that your imagination is better than anything they could have come up with. It immediately prompted a so-called sequel called Book of Shadows, but it took the premise that the first was a film, and the events of its film are not supernatural, but simply human madness and evil. In 2016, a true sequel was released called The Blair Witch, which returned as a found footage piece, although if you look side by side with the original, you can rarely tell that the 2016 film is supposed to be found footage. And while I wouldn't say this film is as scary as it was 20 years ago, I was impressed by how well it held up as a film. It succeeds where others fail because it didn't hold itself to scripted words, but emerged in character from the moment. This absence of deliberate construction gave the film the verisimilitude that was required to bring the audience along for the ride. The marketing may have gotten the word out, but the film itself is what people embraced at the time, and is where the artistry is on display, using its own rawness as its canvas. It was a nice film to revisit after all of this time.